Hi, welcome back to Anime Insights. Today we are going to recap the first season of the show titled Megalobox. The show starts with the introduction of Dog. He is a megaloboxer who fights in an illegal underground ring in fixed matches under the guidance of Gansaku Nanbu. Deep down, he longs to have a real fight that doesn't have a decided result. One evening, he almost hits his bike into Yukiko Shirato, the head of the Shirato group which oversees the Megalonia boxing tournament. Yukiko offers to reimburse Dog, but he refuses, instead angrily telling her that the Megalonia tournament is not true megaloboxing. Yuri, Yukiko's bodyguard, is offended by Dog's lack of respect towards his employer. Dog picks a fight with him in the hopes of experiencing true megaloboxing. Yuri gives off a powerful aura that gets Dog pumped up, but Yukiko stops the fight from happening. Later on, Dog is getting ready to fight his opponent, but Yuri steps into the ring instead. The crowd is shocked since Yuri is actually the Megalobox champion. Nanbu tries to stop the fight, but is punched by Dog, who insists on fighting Yuri with his skills. Yuri gives himself a handicap by only fighting with one hand, but Dog forces him to fight with both hands. Nevertheless, Dog is knocked out in the first round. He gets up just as Yuri is leaving and tells him that he still isn't satisfied. Yuri tells him that if he wants to fight him in a proper Megalonia match, then he needs to work his way up. Afterward, Dog starts defying Nanbu and fights with his full strength, easily defeating his opponent in a fight he was supposed to lose. This gets Nanbu in trouble with the mob boss Fujimaki, who runs the underground ring. Nanbu manages to bargain his way out by telling Fujimaki that he'll pay him back with the money he'll earn when Dog wins Megalonia. Fujimaki complies and creates a forged identity for Dog, who chooses the name Joe. Later, Nanbu enters Dog, now known as Joe, into the Megalobox rankings, which starts him at the bottom. He plans to have Joe fight the toughest opponents so that he can move to the top bracket in just 5 matches. As the two visit Gaskino factory to get better gear, they notice the shopkeeper has a Shirato Group composite titanium prototype gear in the back room. Suddenly, a boy named Sakio and his friends enter with a bag of stolen cameras, which they exchange for red candy drugs. Sakio realizes that there aren't enough drugs for him and attacks the shopkeeper, who pulls out a knife. Joe intervenes but gets thrown out by Higashi, a former megaloboxer. Later, Nanbu plans to have Joe fight a low-ranked megaloboxer named Shark, and they begin their training. Sakio interrupts them and begs them to take him to Megalonia. When they refuse, he breaks into Gaskino and steals the prototype, but gets caught. Joe, Nanbu, and the other kids go to rescue him, where Joe fights Higashi while wearing the prototype, but it breaks apart. Surprisingly, he's able to defeat him without it. At the tournament, Joe enters the ring for his first professional match against Shark. He shocks the whole arena by not wearing any gear for the fight. This is all part of Nanbu's plan to have him attract attention and get more money. Joe gets knocked down in the first round, which badly disorients him, but he gets up at the 9th count just as the round ends. Shark loses his temper in the second round and follows Joe, who spends the rest of the round dodging him. During the interval, Sakio scolds both Joe and Nanbu, which allows the two to focus and get their priorities straight. Joe uses his footwork to knock out Shark in the 3rd round. Some time passes, during which Joe wins 2 more fights and climbs up the ranking while gaining a reputation for himself. He even manages to grab Yukiko's attention. Meanwhile, Nanbu visits an old acquaintance to meet Joe's next opponent. He is shocked to find that the challenger is his ex-student Aragaki, who fell out with Nanbu after he joined the military. During a mission, he fell victim to an explosion. Nanbu believed Aragaki died after an initial news report mistakenly listed him as killed in action. When Aragaki returned to the gym, he was crushed to find it demolished. Aragaki then tells Nanbu that he intends to destroy Joe as payback for betraying a promise that the gym would always be a home for him. Later, Sakio researches Aragaki's boxing record and finds an unbroken string of brutal wins that leaves his opponents in critical condition. Nanbu wants to avoid the fight for fear of what Aragaki's retaliation could do to Joe, but Joe refuses to call it off. Soon the fight begins, and an expertly timed blow from Aragaki leaves Joe knocked down. He manages to get up at the 9th count and continues to fight. Nanbu, believing the fight to be a lost cause, nearly throws in the towel, but Joe stops him and starts to fight back. Recognizing Joe's fighting technique, Aragaki recalls memories from his time under Nanbu and starts to break down as his anger overwhelms him. This results in Aragaki forfeiting in the 4th round. Afterward, Nanbu reconciles with Aragaki in a locker room, and he reveals that this was his last boxing match. He then gives Nanbu a failed betting slip that Nanbu gave Aragaki as a good luck charm, telling him to give it to Joe. Later, Yukiko publicly announces Glenn Burrows as the 3rd entry in Megalonia. Yukiko's brother, Mikio, tells Yuri that the general public cares more about girlless Joe than the other boxers, but he has a plan to stop Joe from making it to Megalonia. On the other hand, Joe continues to grow in popularity, but still has very little chance of being chosen for Megalonia. Mikio wins a match against a fighter named Sugar and tells the crowd that he will challenge Joe next. The Shirato Group's executive committee urges Yukiko to put Mikio in Megalonia, but she has a different agenda and doesn't want her brother to get any further. Mikio tells her that he knows she set up his fight with Sugar in hopes of knocking him out and was also planning to set him up to fight Joe for the same reason. Afterward, Mikio meets with Joe before their fight and reveals that he knows Joe is an illegal underground fighter with a fake name. Joe tries to punch Mikio but is stopped by Nambu, who knocks him out. Later, Mikio wins the match by default when Joe doesn't enter the ring, and he vows to take back the Shirado group from Yukiko. The Shirado group then plans to officially name him as the last finalist in Megalonia. After realizing that Mikio still hasn't revealed Joe's secret to the public, Nambu decides to beg Fujimaki for some info on Mikio to force him into a rematch with Joe. Fujimaki tells Nambu that someone asked for info on Joe's fake identity, but never got the full story from him. Nambu realizes that Mikio bluffed him with half-truths, needing to get leverage on Mikio. He then interrogates a former gear engineer, who says that Mikio led a team to create a gear that could read the gear of other fighters. As Joe wears no gear, Nambu realizes that he might have a chance. He then tries every method to persuade Yukiko to call for a rematch. However, Yukiko is suspicious of Nambu and locks him in a room. That night, as the ceremony is held to introduce the final 4 fighters for Megalonia, Joe crashes the scene on his bike and demands that Mikio fight him fairly. Yukiko decides to rip the 4th Megalonia ticket in half, giving 1/2 each to Joe and Mikio. She declares that whoever wins their rematch wins the final spot. Mikio starts punching Joe as his gear named Ace has been significantly upgraded to learn Joe's moves and counter them within seconds. With none of his combinations working, Joe decides to drop his guard completely, confusing Ace's programming and leaving Mikio unable to finish Joe off. Further flashbacks show Mikio questioning whether the boxing ability is actually his or that of Ace. Meanwhile, Joe decides to bet everything on a counter punch to defeat Mikio. Nambu expects him to throw a right straight punch, but instead, Mikio punches with his left. However, Joe instinctively counters with an uppercut, knocking out Mikio and earning his spot in Megalonia. As Joe's team celebrates at their boat, Nambu sneaks out of their party and meet with Fujimaki. As Joe comes outside to take a leak, Nambu tells him that the real bet he made with Fujimaki was to reach Megalonia and then lose the match upon reaching the semifinals. Joe is angered that Nambu still wants him to throw a fight to save himself and punches him before speeding away on his bike. Sakio overhears their argument and runs away after feeling betrayed as well. Later, Fujimaki tells Nambu that if Joe does not lose the fight, he will kill all 3 of them. Afterward, Nambu finds Sakio and tells him that he found out about his past. Sakio's father designed the prototype gear that Yuri wears, but his research was stolen by someone in the Shirado group and was killed by them. Nambu then takes Sakio to Yukiko's mansion, offering him a chance at revenge, but Sakio can't bring himself to do it. Nambu then convinces Yukiko to take custody of Sakio to protect him from Fujimaki. Later that night, as Yukiko tries to find the truth behind Sakio's father, Yuri defeats a fighter to move on to the final round of Megalonia. Outside the arena, Joe and Yuri talk about their motivations while a drunken Nambu stumbles around the boat, recalling Fujimaki telling him about the kid's story about the scorpion and the frog. Afterward, Fujimaki's men escort Nambu to the arena where Joe is about to fight Glenn in the semifinal match. Meanwhile, Sakio refuses to go see the fight, thinking Joe and Nambu both abandon him for a rid match. Nambu is shown to the luxury room where Fujimaki watches the fight as Joe appears by himself in the ring, wearing his old gear after a visit to his old mechanic friend. Nambu instructs Joe to take a dive in the 3rd round, while Fujimaki keeps a close eye on Nambu. He makes fun of him for acting like a real coach even though he's about to make him lose the fight. Nambu hopes that this act will repay their debt, but Fujimaki states that Joe will be under his heel forever. As Joe gets beaten into the corner, Nambu tries to encourage him to continue fighting, but his gear falls off and he drops down in the ring. Suddenly, Sakio appears, yelling at Joe not to give up. He hits off a mat and manages to beat Glenn with a counter punch. Meanwhile, Nambu begins to brawl against Fujimaki's men. As one of them points a gun at him, Nambu grabs a knife. Meanwhile, Joe and Sakio are celebrating their victory and then race to the room where Nambu has stabbed his remaining eye out as payment to Fujimaki. Impressed at the spectacle, Fujimaki decides to let the 3 go away. Afterward, Yukiko is shocked to discover that Yuri has decided to have his own gear removed. He states that he wants to fight Joe on equal terms, without any gear. A newly blind Nambu invites Aragaki to help train Joe for the fight in his place, using his improved hearing to critique Joe's form. Meanwhile, Yuri visits Mikio at his cabin to get his gear surgically removed. Later, Yukiko learns that Joe's identity badge is fake and has an excuse to disqualify him from the tournament, but she holds off and decides to visit Yuri first. On the other hand, Yuri slowly recovers from the pain of the surgery and refuses Yukiko's help when she offers anesthesia, wanting to fight through the pain on his own. Later, Yukiko visits Joe by the riverbank, telling him that she knows about the fake name, but won't stop his fight with Yuri. She says that she can't understand what made Yuri want to take such drastic action to fight Joe. After some days, Joe and Yuri have their rematch in the finals of Megalonia. Yuri enters the ring with his gear removed to fight Joe on equal terms. Though the recovery from surgery has depleted Yuri's stamina, he continues matching Joe blow for blow until he struggles to sip from his own water bottle after 12 rounds. In the 13th round, both fighters bet everything on one last punch. Suddenly, we shift to 1 year in the future, where Nambu has opened a new boxing gym called Gym Nowhere. The next Megalonia tournament is about to begin, with the original winner having vacated their title. Yuri is shown confined to a wheelchair, and Joe later stops by the gym on his bike to deliver a couple of packages. The ending title card reveals that Girlless Joe won the championship fight against Yuri a year ago by a knockout. This is how the first season of Megalobox ends. For Season 2, make sure you hit the like button and tap the subscribe icon. Thank you for watching.